Today I'm being joined by Mr. Ambassador to Cambodia, Australian Ambassador to Cambodia, Mr. Pablo Kang. And thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for this opportunity and allow me to sit down here and interview and also discuss with you on various topics, including the current relation between Cambodia and Australia, as well as your support for our agricultural production, and to the least extent is your initial support for the smart city development in Presidio province. This is very important works that we need to discuss and would like to learn more from you too. Let me begin my interview without further ado, but we'll start with the current bilateral relation. We know that both countries established bilateral relations in 1952, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And after that, of course, because of the war, it was cut off, and it later resumed in the post-war era in the 1990 or something. And since then, the relation between our two countries continue to exponentially expanding. And this is very important, and I hope that it's going to be further engagement, closer relation in terms of political, economic, as well as people-to-people relation too. But my question to you is, what is your take on the current bilateral relation between our two countries? Maybe you have different view from mine, then you can share with us.
Okay. Okun Pisai and Chomripsu everyone. Chomripsu and Nidao. Well, you did a very good job there of saying what I would say. Yes, very right. You're very correct. The diplomatic relations were established in 1952, so that's 68 years ago. But even before then, in 1951, was when Cambodian students first started travelling to Australia under what we called back then the Colombo Plan, which was set up after the Second World War, and it was the objective of it was to provide Western education for a lot of up-and-coming students from Asian countries. So that started, before the establishment of diplomatic relations. But yes, we have come a long way. We set up what we called back then a legation here in Phnom Penh in 1957. And in fact, last week I had the pleasure of meeting someone, Mr. Ki Moy, who actually started work at the legation in 1957. And so we were talking about the history. And the history is very important as the foundation for any bilateral relationship. We're not just talking about the government-to-government relationship, but we like to talk about the people-to-people relationship, which is why I talk about students, because of course back then, in 1951, Cambodian students started going to Australia, and today we have about 2,500 Cambodian students currently in Australia. If it wasn't for Covid-19, you would have been one of those, right? Or maybe next year. That's a really powerful, positive symbol of our bilateral relationship, because Cambodian students, not only do they study in Australia and they get to specialise in very important academic disciplines, because these are people who do masters or PhD degrees, but of course they get to understand Australia, our values, our lifestyle, our food, our language, our way of life. And not only that, but a few years ago, back in 2014, the Australian government established the new Colombo Plan. And the new Colombo Plan takes Australian students, university students, into the Asia Pacific. And so, for example, this year, if it hadn't been for Covid-19, we would have had about 550 Australian students in Cambodia. So it's this two-way education exchange, which really does contribute to a lot of mutual understanding between our two countries. But you are correct. Of course, in about March 1975, as the Khmer Rouge were advancing on Phnom Penh, the Australian embassy closed, and we didn't reopen until about November 1991. Which of course was just after the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, which Australia was proud to play a very important role in the negotiation of the Paris Peace Accords, something that is still acknowledged to this day by many people that I meet both in the government and outside, people from the older generation who remember that period very clearly. So our embassy was re-established in 1991, and we've been going on since then. Of course, we have a lot of Australians of Cambodian descent. We have approximately 60,000, which in a country population of about 25 million, it's actually a significant diaspora, quite a big size. Lots of Cambodians in Australia. Melbourne, of course, is probably where most of them live. Places like Springvale in Melbourne, but also in Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, very significant communities, very passionate. Quite a lot of dual nationals, so people who have Cambodian and Australian passports. And I think that also contributes to the fabric of our bilateral people-to-people relationship.
Interesting. Well, I think when we talk about bilateral relation and diplomatic relation, of course, we could not talk without focusing on very complicated issue here in Cambodia, particularly human rights and democratic development. It's continue to be something because Cambodia still continue to be criticized for its existing problem, including political, civil, and also labor right, of course. And one of the examples I could raise is the recent withdrawal of the trade preferential system by the European Union. And the European Union also cites this issue as the problem behind the decision. So to you as ambassador, and Australia have been doing a lot of things, development assistance and the other engagement, but politically and also diplomatically, what more you can do to support Cambodia in developing this sector? Because there are a lot of people discussing, urging Australia, which is a very close neighbor, to do more to help us.
Very good question. So we are an Asia-Pacific country, and of course Southeast Asia as a whole is a big focus for us. And I think, yes, we do devote a lot of attention and give a lot of emphasis to looking at those issues you mentioned, human rights, democratic development, for a number of reasons. I think principally because it fundamentally reflects who we are as a society, as a people. We are a very old, established liberal democracy, of course, far from perfect. And whenever I talk about democratic development or human rights, I always say that we are not perfect by any means. Australia still has a lot of challenges in both these areas. But if you subscribe to the fact that human rights are universal, and I think the government of Cambodia often does talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the different human rights covenants and treaties, then the situation of human rights in any country is legitimately open for discussion. Of course, everyone has different perspectives. The second reason I think why we attach a lot of importance to these issues is, as I mentioned before, we do have a lot of people in Australia who invested a lot of time and effort in terms of the Paris Peace Accords, in terms of the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia. So we were there at the rebirth, if you like, of Cambodian democracy in the early 1990s. So for all those reasons, we continue to play a very active role and take a keen interest in the issues that you mentioned.
Okay. Before I move to your support for agricultural development, I would have a very small question. Of course, if we look to the future, there are a lot of things to deal with for Cambodia as developing country. We can name it development conundrum. There are a lot of problems with the issue that I raised earlier, human rights and democracy, and also economic issue after the Covid-19. Then how do you see the future of Cambodia? It's going to be price, or it's going to be a lot of challenges ahead that require a lot of work to do?
Yeah, well, I think every country is evaluating how its future will pan out after COVID. So of course you have the immediate priority, which is addressing the health needs, the health capabilities to ensure that if there is a major outbreak of COVID, and let's hope there isn't, but if there is in Cambodia, that that Cambodia has the means to deal with that. And I think the Ministry of Health is doing a very good job in managing the situation, and of course with a lot of support as well from the likes of the World Health Organization, US CDC is playing a role, the Pasteur Institute based here in Cambodia. But then of course people are looking over the horizon and they're waiting to see, you know, once COVID is brought under control, you know, hopefully there may be a vaccine at some point developed in the next 6 to 12 months, you know, hopefully. And then people are focusing on the huge economic impacts that of course COVID has already had in Cambodia. You know, I went to Siem Reap with my family in July for a short holiday, and we visited Angkor Wat, and I've been to Angkor Wat many times. This is the first time I went there when there were 10 people there in the entire complex. Yeah. It was a very strange experience. And of course, that's just a symbol of the huge impact on the tourism sector. You mentioned the EBA, and of course, you know, EBA, the implementation of that happened not that long ago, a few weeks ago, but of course COVID was already having a major impact in terms of the complete drop in demand for garment manufactured products. So that's also another big issue. Construction. Yeah. I was in Sihanoukville a few weeks ago and I saw there's so many tall buildings there that are half finished. You know, they've got cranes sitting on top of them all, but no one's working on them. It's just everything's ground to a halt. So I think, you know, that's that focus on how do we recover? How does Cambodia recover from COVID has to be at the forefront of everybody's minds. Immediate priority is to address the health issues, but then of course the longer term economic recovery. And of course Cambodia was doing very well. You know, of course it graduated to lower middle income status a few years ago. The government has this target to achieve, you know, upper middle income status by 2030 and then high income by 2050. And if you look around Phnom Penh, like when I first arrived here, I remember arriving at the airport, getting into a car, driving to my house here, and looking at the, you know, the tall buildings or a couple of Rolls Royces I passed, like, what is this? I mean, it was quite a surprise. Yeah. And it is a sign of the fact that Cambodia has been growing very strongly. And of course, that stopped this year. So the focus is how do we restart that? How do we help Cambodia, not just Australia, but many other friends, to be in a position that when COVID is under control, to grow the economy again? And especially, I think, tourism, construction, garment manufacturing, but also there's been a lot of focus on now the Industrial Revolution 4.0. Yeah. I think Cambodia is still largely, I think, you know, Cambodia produces a lot of what I call low-value products, agricultural products, garments, clothing, footwear, but there's a big focus now on how do we sort of help Cambodia to become a digital economy. How do we help with the Industrial Revolution 4.0? I think there's already some really good signs, like the proliferation of e-commerce here. That was a real surprise to me when I first arrived. Just, you know, whether it's you're ordering a tuk-tuk on Grab or ABA Pay, I'm not that I would preference any bank, but that's just an example, or ordering your food on your phone. I mean, that is just it's a way of life. Yeah. In a way that even in Australia, it's not really, you know. And I think COVID has only accelerated the development of e-commerce, and so I think that's a really good potential prospect for the economy in the future, which is why Australia is also putting some work into assisting in the e-commerce sector to try and grow the sector, give people the skills to be able to grow, help women entrepreneurs who are doing a lot of work in the e-commerce sector. So just some of the areas that I think will be important going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. So now let me move to agricultural production, which also enjoys your country's support so far. Covid-19 not only create a very concerning impact on economy and also some sort of social issue, including public health. But at the same time, it also sparked a concern for food supply disruption because many countries still off the border, like Cambodia in particular. During the COVID, we also have to refocus on what we should do more to support our agricultural production to ensure that we can be in the future self-sufficient. So your country have been doing a lot, especially the partnership that we have currently. But the goal of this partnership is to make sure that Cambodia can modernize its agricultural production in the ultimate goal, one of the other thing. And I just want you to explain so how far this goal can be, and then how bumpy this road will be in the future for Cambodia, and your assistance will be, of course, very important. But can you tell us about this such a situation?
Yeah, a very important question. We've been assisting the agriculture sector in Cambodia since the 1960s. We helped establish the CARDI, the Cambodia Agriculture Research Development Institute, and of course our most recent support has been through principally two programs. One is CAVAC, the Cambodia-Australia Agricultural Value Chain Program, and the other is ACR, which is the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. So the two organisations kind of work hand in hand. But our principal aim is to help modernise the agriculture sector, to increase productivity, to boost supply chains, to enable Cambodia to export more of its food products to other countries. So you can have all the free trade agreements in the world, but if you don't have the logistics and the supply chains to actually get the products to those countries, it's just a paper agreement. So we're very focused on that. Of course, with COVID, and as I mentioned, with tourism and construction and garment sector all being very depressed, of course, everyone is focusing on the agriculture sector as the main way to maintain livelihoods for not just for Cambodian farmers, but for exporters and food security, as you mentioned. So there's a few things that we focus on. One is increasing the mechanisation of agriculture to make the production processes more efficient. So I've been in a few different places, Kampong Cham and Takao, to see this in practice. So in the past, I think a lot of farmers, for example, would distribute seed around their paddies by hand, and it would result in a rather uneven distribution, quite a bit of wastage, whereas now we have technologies, a lot of which were developed here in Cambodia, that you put seeders on the back of tractors, and it basically means that you have a very even distribution of seed, so that it's a very efficient process. It doesn't waste the seed. It ensures that the crop is spread evenly. The same thing, for example, with land levelling, which is another technology that is used here, and then pest management, which is obviously a big problem for quality of crops that are produced. So these are things that we're investing in through the CAVAC program. We're also looking at ways to increase the quality control of crops, whether that be cassava or rice. Of course, Cambodian rice, the kind of high value, fragrant white rice like Senkar Ob variety is very popular, including in Australia. So we actually import a lot of fragrant white rice from Cambodia. But to do that, you need to make sure that it is quality product, because we're not just talking about the raw product. This is processed, packaged here, and then shipped out to Australia and other countries. So it's very important to ensure that the quality control remains there so that buyers continue to have confidence. And then, as I mentioned, the supply chains. So how do we help to ensure that products that are produced in the agriculture sector can be exported? So recently, for example, we signed an MOU with Khmer Enterprise, and the goal of that is to actually jointly invest in some agro-processing industries, some companies that are working in this sector, to boost them up and to help them export their products. So that's been really interesting. I've had the I've been fortunate enough to be able to visit quite a few agriculture schemes that are supported by us. In fact, just last week I was in Takao looking at an irrigation scheme that we have supported there. And that basically enables rice farmers to plant crops 2 or 3 times a year. Before they could only do it maybe once a year, and it was related to the harvest time and the wet season. But now, because of these irrigation schemes where we have constructed canals and pump water stations, it enables farmers to have access to water all through the year, so they can basically plant 2 or 3 times, and that obviously increases their yield and their profits. I was with the Prime Minister also in Takao about a month ago, where he was inspecting one of these schemes, and I think that was maybe one of the first times he'd had a look at one of these schemes in practice, and he called for it to be expanded to other parts of Cambodia. So it was it's a very well-established scheme with a very good reputation.
I see. So we can consider it's one of the success story for your support.
I think so. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, I think that for agricultural support, I'm interested in the issue of, or you mentioned construction in Presidential Province, that show how the city have been experiencing a very rapid development. Of course, we have to have a well plans and also well-established policy in place to manage it. But Australia right now focus on smart city in Presidential Province, smart city projects. But I'm not so sure what this project is all about. Can you share with us
sure.
detailed information? What is the plan in particular, and what we can expect from that?
Sure. Well, there's a number of things I could talk about. I mean, overall in Cambodia, not just in Kait Pre Sihanouk, but in Cambodia as a whole, we've been focusing on construction safety. Of course, this does stem back to what happened in Sihanoukville, unfortunately, and not just there, Siem Reap, your hometown, Kep, and most recently up in Banteay Menchai, right? So these collapses in the construction centre on work sites, the lack of attention to safety standards and making sure that when buildings are being constructed, that obviously they're done in a safe manner. So we responded to a direct request from the government of Cambodia to assist in this sector. We've actually, earlier this year, just before COVID actually, we took a group of 22 people from Cambodia to Australia to do a short course in construction safety standards at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. And they've since come back, and their focus is on how does Cambodia develop the right, the most appropriate building safety codes for Cambodia. So part of their work in Australia, their study, was looking at a range of different codes that applied around the world. They visited work sites. They've absorbed all that learning, and now they're trying to work out, okay, how do we develop and enforce these codes? Because of course Cambodia now has a construction law as of last year. So I was talking to an official from the provincial department of land management, urban planning, construction when I was in Sihanoukville, and he actually went to Australia to do this. And one of the things he told me was like, I was asking, what did you sort of learn, or what did you find interesting about being in Australia and comparing it to how things are done here? And he talked a lot about scaffolding. He said Australia spends a lot of money on scaffolding to make sure that obviously construction is supported in the best way possible. And that was what he had taken away. In terms of the smart city concept that you talked about, so that is focused on in Sihanoukville. As you say, Sihanoukville has completely transformed in the past 5 years from a quiet provincial town to, I don't know, how would you describe it today? I was there last month and saw for myself the tremendous rapid development that has happened. So just the number of skyscrapers and construction ongoing, but at the same time, there's still a lot of dirt roads around the town, and so it's a strange juxtaposition when you have, modern kind of edifices with dirt roads. So we were trying to work with the Royal Government of Cambodia and with the governor in the province to see what can be done to ensure that from now on that Sihanoukville develops in a smart way, right? Of course, the city itself and the province has had a lot of impacts with, firstly the ban on online gambling, secondly with COVID. So a lot of people have left. There's a lot of unfinished construction, as I mentioned. But the smart city concept is focusing on how to manage things, manage the development of the city, including through the use of technology and applications of technology. So, for example, traffic management, which before COVID was a serious problem in Sihanoukville. The traffic was very congested. The lack of sort of road planning. So that is one example of how you can actually use remote traffic management systems to better sort out the flow of traffic around the city. Another very obvious way is for citizens of Sihanoukville to be able to pay for their utility bills, whether it be electricity, whether it be water, on their phone. So enabling the uptake of smart technologies to basically get citizens the services they need, but also the government the revenue that comes from those services. Or if you're driving around and you need to find somewhere to park, you can actually do that through an app. You can basically identify, where are the opportunities for you, and that helps with the traffic management flow. So these are just some examples of how the further development of Sihanoukville can be done through the use of smart technologies, so that these things are better planned compared to maybe the development that's happened sort of organically in a lot of ways over the last 5 years, and we're very focused on helping the province there.
My very last question. There have been a lot of discussion, some sort of discussion I would say, on the rising Chinese investment in the city, Sihanouk city, and also how the other country, particularly United States, Australia, Japan, and the other actors have been active in supporting Cambodia to focus on the city development and take part in that process as well. Is Chinese investment is the case for your country to get engaged closely with the city?
Well, of course, a lot of investment in Sihanoukville has come from China, especially over the last 5 years. We don't focus on looking at a particular country and saying, well, all that investment is bad or all that investment is good. We want to make sure that, as I said, the investment is planned, that we can help with our technical expertise to better regulate that type of investment. And of course in Sihanoukville, when I was there, I visited the autonomous port, and that is a significant source of Japanese investment. So millions and millions of dollars. So I think, rather than focus on any one country, I think our priority is to help the government of Cambodia and the provincial government in how better to address development moving forward. And of course, China, Japan, US, us, there are many different partners in the international community for Cambodia, and some of them have different focuses. So for us, of course, whether it's agriculture, demining, whether it's the health sector, infrastructure, so water and energy, helping address gender equality issues, supporting persons with disabilities, social protection through helping with the ID Poor database. These are all the things that we look at. But other partners have different focuses, and I think, if you look at China, I think infrastructure is a big focus of theirs, and on a large scale. So we need to look at how we can work with other countries to make sure that not just China, but the infrastructure that is being put in place reaches the end users and makes sure that those benefits get to the end users. So that is our focus. And I think whether it's in Sihanoukville or in other places in Cambodia, here of course, Siem Reap, Battambang, areas that are, I think, just prior to COVID were growing quite strongly. That will be our goal, to work with others, to work with the government.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your time and this special opportunity. Thank you for the insight too.
Okay, Thank you.